Been thinking about conferences. I suppose I should think about conferences more, given that the title of my channel is The Conference Report. But specifically about academic conferences. I used to go to academic conferences a lot. It's kind of my job really to go to those places. But I haven't been to any this year at all. I went to a couple last year. But I used to go to quite a few, and either as just a delegate to listen to what other people were talking about, or occasionally to do papers myself. They tended to be on either my day job, which is theatre, so I'd talk about some aspect of theatre, or they'd be about something like consciousness, because a lot of the things I'm interested in are to do with consciousness and creativity, cognition, a bit to do with media and technology and how those things relate together really. So I've done quite a bit of that kind of stuff. I used to really enjoy going to a conference that started out in Wales called Consciousness Reframed, and then became something of a kind of roadshow. It'd be in different places each year, so I went to a few of those, talked about stuff. I'd never managed to get to the big consciousness conference at Tucson. I was invited a couple of times, but it was always at a time of the year when I couldn't get away really. But they are interesting. If you've not, I'm sure if you're an academic you know what I'm talking about, but if you've never been to an academic conference, they do sound like really dry things, but they are quite interesting really if you get the right one. There's some problems with them, and one of the reasons why I don't go as often as I used to is because I got a bit naffed off with them. But they are interesting in some ways, because you are obviously surrounded by people with a similar interest to yourself, and the format is really clean usually. You get on your hind legs for 15 minutes and talk about whatever you're interested in at the moment, and then you get 10 minutes for questions, and then you're on to somebody else. You know what I mean? So the format is really clear about what your responsibilities are, and because you know what other people are interested in, because they've spent their 15 minutes in the spotlight talking about what they're interested in, you've got something to talk about. So you've got like an automatic introduction to that person. You can go up to them afterwards and talk about what they've said. So there's a lot of the kind of social awkwardnesses around people you don't know are alleviated by that. And once you've been to a few, you get to recognise the same faces, and you can meet old friends there, that kind of stuff. And there's usually parties and banquets involved, so there's usually a kind of fairly rich social life associated with them. Why am I talking about that? Can't bloody remember. Can't remember why I started talking about that. Oh well, never mind. Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting things about it. One of the things that I got kind of, not exactly queasy about, but one of the things I wanted to kind of question for myself really, was that 10 minutes in which you stand up and talk about the things that interest you. It sounds a bit vague. I mean, I'm talking about research really, something that you've spent quite a bit of time looking at. You'll have read the available literature, you've carried out the experiments and done the field trials, or done the practice yourself, and have processed it over months or years before you got to that point. So it's not quite as ad hoc as I'm making it sound. But there is something funny about that. It's very authoritative, that position. Just the physical aspect of that position, but also the kind of structures around it. You stand perfectly motionless pretty much for 15 minutes, and you have all these eyes on you, which could be anything from 3 people and a dog to a couple of hundred people. And basically lay yourself on the line, but you are in a position of authority for those 10 or 15 minutes, which is slightly odd. And of course you are making yourself vulnerable at the same time though, because typically, depending on who's in the audience, you get questioned at the end of it, and that questioning can be pretty vicious. If someone disagrees wholeheartedly with what you've said, or it's in complete contradiction to their research, you can get into a real, bitch slapping contest, which is very exciting actually. It's great fun. It's not so much fun when it's happening to you, but when you're watching it, it's really great. To see all that kind of emotion, usually reined back, pulled back, but just coming out in the form of barbed arguments. It's brilliant. But you can get a bit tired of that kind of thing. What else have I got to say about that? Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why this channel is called The Conference Report, I might have said this before actually, isn't because there's anything to do with that conference, or is it tangentially to do with those kind of conferences. It's really to do with Well, partly an uncertainty that I had about that kind of authoritative position, the idea that to commandeer a set of knowledge you have to kind of make it stationary at the front of a crowd of people. I quite like the idea of knowledge which is a bit more ambulatory and which moves about a bit more, which is why I like these walking videos, and which, you know, changes, you know, the alignments in that knowledge and the kind of context in which it's meaningful changes a bit, which does in a lot of cases. You know, a lot of knowledge isn't objective in that kind of stationary way, but does change according to where you place it, and I'm quite interested in that idea. So I'm interested in this other kind of conferencing, which is about conferencing on the move. And I guess I'm influenced here by The Conference of the Birds, which is a poem by Attar, which is a Persian poet, and he wrote this long poem about these birds that go on a journey, and they're supposed to be going to get something or going to find something, but when they get there, they effectively find themselves. It's not they discover that the journey itself was the knowledge, not the goal at the end of it. It's that kind of thing, really. So I guess I was partly influenced by that. The other thing I really like about conferences, and this is a bit idiosyncratic, I would admit, is that, you know, if you ever go to an academic conference, or if you're ever invited to one, you'll know that what you're presented with when you get there, or is on the website before you arrive, is a list of the abstracts, which is, you know, 200, 250 word synopses of what each of these presenters is going to talk about. You know, so a couple of months before it arrives, before the conference date arrives, each of the people who've been invited to that conference will have been asked to submit an abstract. So they write, you know, 250 words about what they're going to talk about. And quite often, you know, those abstracts are written before the research is complete, apart from anything else, particularly in things like the humanities, which doesn't have, you know, kind of hard, concrete results in quite the same way. So there's a particular art to writing a good abstract, which is about trying to capture some aspects of the research you're doing without being too committal about what you're going to say. And those are beautiful reading, I think. Many of those abstracts are far more interesting in many cases than the actual full presentations that you go and sit in front of. Yeah, I really like those, the form of the conference abstract. I mean, I've written a few abstracts myself in my time. In fact, sometimes I write abstracts with no intention at all of writing the final paper, just as a kind of way of, I don't know, taking a kind of step into a set of ideas, but just leaving them hanging like an ellipsis, rather than closing them down into a final set of findings. Yeah, that's it really. That was a contentless video, sorry about that.